Hi everyone, welcome. We'll just give everybody 30 seconds here to start trickling in and then we'll go ahead and get started. Great, and as we wait for everyone to join us, I would just like to welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. This is part of our Bay Area Impact webinar series, and today our topic is going to be healthy masculinity and male allyship in the workplace. My name is Leslie Alfaro, and I'm a policy manager here at the Bay Area Council, primarily working on our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and also on our workforce of the future. I'm really excited to have everybody join in on this conversation today as a woman of color in the DEI space. This is obviously not a new topic for me, but one of the things that I often find in the conversation when we're talking about gender equity and gender equality is that much of the lift is put on women. Usually topics are around, how to be better at negotiating, improving your leadership skills, things like that. And although those things can be very valuable, it does leave a really big part of the population out of this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all our guest speakers today on really how we can engage men in this conversation to make sure that we are able to reach that goal of gender equality. I encourage everyone to use our Q&A box throughout, and our moderators will do their best to get to questions. And with that, I will kick it over to the Bay Area Council's CEO and President, Jim Wunderman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leslie, for the work you do leading our efforts on DEI. You're really amazing, and thank you for helping to put this together. So this is very, very exciting webinar. We do a lot of great informational webinars, but this one, I think it's a little bit more personal to many of us, certainly to me. This is an area the Bay Area Council's been working on for quite a number of years now. And many years ago, I can't remember whether it was 7 or 9, we actually held a seminar like this in person in those days for a group of male leaders, corporate male leaders, to talk about how they could be partners and allies in the movement to create a more equitable society. We were very focused on gender equity at the time. I think the subject has broadened over time, but it was really fascinating. And I thought, I felt very proud to be part of that at the time. And since that time, the Bay Area Council has been involved on many, many fronts in the DEI movement. And we've done, our Economic Institute has done a number of phenomenal reports on opportunities to move things forward in the workplace and to analyze ways in which we can create a more equitable society, and that society will be a benefit to everybody. But I think it's really important, the questions around allyship of men and how, as Leslie said, just how critical that is to the overall objective of creating an equal society and an opportune society for everybody. For me personally, this continues to be a learning experience. I anticipate I'll learn a lot more today. Fortunately, we've got great folks to learn from. And so with that, let me get to our terrific guests. So Jennifer Siebel Newsom, I think probably everyone knows you, Jennifer. It's great to have you back with the Bay Area Council again. Jennifer is a filmmaker, advocate, thought leader, and the first partner of California. She graduated with honors from Stanford University and Stanford's Graduate School of Business. She wrote, directed, and produced the 2011 award-winning documentary called Misrepresentation. And as a result of Misrepresentation's impact, she launched the Representation Project, a nonprofit organization that uses film and media as a catalyst for cultural transformation. Her second film as director was The Mask You Live In, and that explored how America's narrow definition of masculinity is harming boys and men and society at large. And a few years ago, I think it was at the Castro Theater, Bay Area Council was honored to be able to screen The Mask You Live In with Jennifer, which was very exciting. And her third film in the trilogy, The Great American Lie, unveils the underlying cultural causes of inequality in America. She's also executive produced the Emmy Award-winning and Academy Award-winning nominated documentary, The Invisible War and was an executive producer on the Emmy Award-winning documentary, The Hunting Ground. I could go on, but we don't have that much time today, so we want to hear from her and not so much for me. Let me introduce Ray Arata. Ray is someone I've known for, I think, at least 30 years, probably a little bit more. So we've kind of grown up together. And Ray is the author of Showing Up: How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace. He's a speaker, a master facilitator, he's an ally in training. As an aspiring ally, Ray's personal mission involves going into the corporate world and getting male executives to stand up and stand strong when it comes to including and advancing women and minorities in the workplace. Ray brings a unique and much needed experiential point of view that supports organizations in meeting men where they are, without shame and without blame, and guiding them on an inclusionary, heart-centric leadership journey. As I said, I've known Ray for a long time, and I've borne witness to this journey, and it's really exciting to see the transformation you've been through, but even more exciting, the leadership that you provide to people like me and others. So let's start, let's hear from you, Jennifer. So we're talking about healthy masculinity, and we're centering on your perspective as a woman. So what does healthy masculinity mean to you in respect to male allyship and leadership?
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Ray. It's a treat to be here with you. And look, I mean, from my perspective, right, healthy masculinity is about being whole. It's about being a human being. It's about leaning into and recognizing that as human beings, we have emotions, we have feelings. We're not disconnected from our heads and our hearts. And so healthy, whole masculinity is just about being true to your authentic self and leaning into care. And it's what we need, I think, to move our society forward is more and more men to be comfortable just being fully realized whole human beings who have an array of emotions and feelings and aren't feeling like they have to perform a certain type of masculinity that conforms with dominance, power, control, and aggression. And so, you know, I do think, and we'll get into this later, but I do think that as healthy, whole individuals, we're going to see a real movement of sorts that is inviting and welcoming to all people. And ultimately that will move our society forward.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And let me turn basically the same question over to you, Ray. What does healthy masculinity mean to you?
First of all, thanks, Jim and Jen. Check to everything you said, Jen, because that's what in my man way I seek to teach men. But upon deeper reflection, what healthy masculinity means to me, I try to look at this through the context of leadership. And so I have what I call my 6 heart-based leadership principles. And the first one is emotional literacy, which basically means be connected to your emotions instead of stuffing them like most of us guys learned to do for so long. Second is vulnerability. Third is authenticity. And you use the word performative. We're not looking for that. We want people to be their authentic, true selves. Fourth, which is also really important, is accountability. And to take responsibility for your words, choices, and actions, intended or not. Fifth is inclusivity, doing our part to make sure everyone feels included. And the last one is love. And that one's real important to me because any of us that is seen, heard, respected, and valued for who we are, to me, that's love. So imagine if we as leaders and allies have the power to flip the switch on that. So that's what healthy masculinity is to me. Inside job. Yeah,
that's right.
So Ray, going forward on that, for years you've been leading work in this area, and you talk to a lot of men and groups and men. So what do you see, and where do you think we males are in 2022 when it comes to healthy masculinity and allyship?
So Jim, and then I'd like to have there's one slide that we have today that I want to have put up, and I want to speak to what I call the 5 states of men that after hundreds of conversations, maybe more with men, as well as DEI leaders, I kept hearing groupings of men. And so for all of you that are looking at the chart, this first group of men, they're the ones that feel threatened. And what I mean by that is they're threatened by DEI initiatives in that they feel like the DEI initiatives threaten their job. The word "there" is what we need to underscore here, because that's what I call their unexamined privilege in plain view. Michael Kimmel once said, privilege is invisible to those who have it. So it's a group of men that are legitimate, and there are techniques on how we can meet those men where they are. So it's not about vilifying them if they identify as white male. It's about understanding where they are and then helping them understand and utilize their privilege. The next group feel excluded, and these men articulate, and this is what I hear them say, there's ERGs or BRGs for BIPOC folk, women, LGBTQIA, but what about us? And I like this group because they're convertible. With their temporary feeling of exclusion, we can flip them to better understand, and they can step off the sidelines and start becoming allies. This next group, the ones that are afraid, they're probably the biggest group. They're the ones that are afraid to say or do the wrong thing, so they don't do anything. And that signals complicity, and we don't want that either. The next group are the uncertain ones, which are Ray et al. What do? I just don't know what to do. Tell me. And then the last but not least, the allies in training. That's the group that are already acting like allies. So I want to get the audience involved right now. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the men, anybody who identifies as a man, to look at these 5 categories. And we're going to put a poll up. And before you answer, there's research out there that says men feel they're further along than they actually are. So take a moment and pick the one that you most resonate with currently, and go ahead and do that now. And we'll see what happens. And then we'll show you the results. And I have 2 more polls that we're going to do, but I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do yet. So dance on your keyboards, pick one. And Joel or Anna, if you're doing the controls there, let me know when it's complete, and then we'll show the results. Okay, so this is good. So a lot of times I see a lot more people afraid, but what we're seeing is uncertain. That's what we're looking for, that we want more men. And Leslie mentioned this earlier, that she's very familiar with what this is like about the lift. And what if for the men who are on this call, think about what we're doing here and what we're talking about as an invitation to share your responsibility, to help lift and make the changes that we're all looking for. All right, so the next poll, if you identify other than male, we were going to use the same poll categories, but here the question is, what's the most common state of men that you encounter in your day-to-day? Very different question. Based on the men that are in your organizations, what category do you most encounter? And some of you might be thinking that this is the setup. It kind of is and it kind of isn't. But what we want to see is where the men feel that they are, so that everybody can see that, which is valuable in and of itself. And we want to see what may be true for those that don't identify as male. And as I hear myself say this, I'm aware that I'm using binary language. And I just want everybody to know that. And for those of you that don't identify on the binary spectrum, I just want to let you know that I'm aware of that. But for right now, okay, here we go. Okay, so threatened and afraid. And that what's a big surprise here, and in a good way, is that a lot of you are encountering more and more men that want to be part of the solution. That's what we're looking for. So last but not least, we can close that poll down. The final prompt is, okay, guys, this is your opportunity for redemption. What category do you aspire to? Look at those same categories. There's really only 2 choices here, but what categories do you aspire to? And as those results come in, I'll be moving this back over to you, Jim, so you can get ready. So let's just see what happens real quick here. There we go. Even better yet, 96. And whoever answered uncertain, 4%, thanks for your honesty. Jim, over to you.
Thanks for that, Ray, and thanks to everybody for responding to the questions. And I would say, in my observation, amongst the leaders of the Bay Area Council, many of whom are CEOs of companies and responsible for moving their own organizations in the direction of allyship. I've seen a lot of movement on this over the last few years. So I'm really heartened. Men are not only haven't just reached the level of uncertainty, which they may still be at that level, but they're committed and more committed to this. And they don't just see this as a passing fancy. They see it as something that's critically important, and they understand their own role of being not just with the program, but being true advocates for the cause. I see it more and more and more. And I think that's what this webinar is about today. So that's very positive. On the downside, we have Cam Newton, an NFL quarterback who, and this is just a lead into the next question for Jennifer, about her upcoming documentary, Fair Play, that looks at gendered division of labor in the home. And we're all excited to see that, Jennifer. But here comes Cam Newton, who says, well, a woman's place is in the kitchen, taking care of the likes of me. That's their role. They're supposed to be helping men succeed. So, my view, the view on one hand for me is things have really gotten a lot. We've come a long way. And then that happens, and I think we have a long way to travel. Jennifer, talk about fair play. Talk about men's traditional gender roles, and what's the benefit, for men stepping into care.
Well, let me first address the fact that we have made progress since I made my first documentary, The Mask You Live In. It was, people were uncomfortable talking about masculinities, talking about healthy masculinities, talking about toxic masculinities. And now this isn't just academic conversation, this is mainstream conversation. So the fact that we've been labeling this and naming this is progress. Secondly, clearly we have this event today, we have all of these allies and all of these who are uncertain but want to be allies. That's progress. And I see through my documentary that's coming out this summer, Fair Play, so many men stepping into care at home and recognizing the value of being allies at work. So all of that is progress. I think what we're seeing with the Cam Newtons of the world, what we're seeing with the far right, with the Tucker Carlsons of the world, the Rogans, the Jordan Petersons, is you're seeing fear and you're seeing the back up against the wall, and it's a backlash, right? It's a backlash to men being whole and healthy and actually happy in their role as fathers and allies. And so these men are threatened. And by the way, we women, not we women, but women can be complicit and in their, comfort with role playing and their place in the home and men's place as the breadwinners are out in the world. And so you see that, and we're in a time of reckoning in our country. And it's really interesting. It's very scary. We've seen legislation that is moving us backwards in many ways when it comes to guns, when it comes to choice, when it comes to LGBTQ rights, when it comes to education, when it comes to recognizing that we're all deserving of equal opportunity in life, and that certain communities have been harmed by our practices in the past, and that we actually need to recognize and reconcile those inequities and right the ship in this country, especially for under-resourced and underprivileged communities. And so I think we're, at this tipping point. And I'm hoping my new documentary, Fair Play, which I made with Hello Sunshine and Eve Rodsky, which was inspired by her book, Fair Play, I'm hoping that it helps men recognize that they're not alone in feeling this want and need to play a larger role in care and to be allies in the workplace. And I'm hoping that it's part of this larger movement that ultimately, rights the ship in our country and enables us all to thrive, not just survive, but thrive and deconstruct and get rid of all of these limiting gender stereotypes that ultimately thwart progress.
So Jennifer, when will we be seeing Fair Play? And can the Bay Area Council get people together again? Can we have another screening?
Yes, you can. I'm so excited. And I will know more on the timing of that soon, but the film is actually coming out July 8th, both in a limited theatrical screening model and on TV and digitally. So the film Fair Play will be out then. And it's really inspiring. There's so many physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional health benefits to men stepping into care and being allies. So we all win, right? Children win, right? Children win. The men rely less on antidepressants and medication. They live longer. Wives are thrive and are happier when they have space to pursue their own passions and interests and careers. And children's behavior is better when they have more time with their fathers. So there's just so many benefits to men leaning into care. And I can't wait for y'all to see that documentary.
Yeah, excited about it. Nothing like modeling, so we can actually see and feel it. Maybe one quick final question, for you, Ray, you've been at this a long time. How are you seeing it going? And, what's your latest thinking about how to get men more engaged? And then I'm going to turn it over to our next panel.
Thanks, Jim. You just said the word modeling. And so 3 things need to happen. One, the first thing is organizations need to elevate this to a leadership imperative above and beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what that basically means is organizations need to have those leaders that have position, power, platform, and privilege to be courageous and to model. Jennifer mentioned earlier, a whole human. So when we do a Better Man conference or when you do a training, I asked to talk to the CEO and say, I need you to be a whole human. I literally say this. I need you to, Jim, I've talked to you about this. Tell on yourself. Admit you've made a mistake. Share your learning. Why? Because all the other men will see that you've just given them permission. Mm-hmm. So by going first, that's really key. It also signals to everybody else that doesn't identify like us that this organization is for real, and maybe it's possible that I can show up and be who I am. And then last but not least, the word invitation comes to mind. Invite more and more and more men, keep the shame and the blame out of it, seek to meet them where they are, and understand that this is a multi-year journey. Make the commitment and let's go. That's it.
Thanks very much. It just reminds me personally how I've always felt in one way or another quite vulnerable, but I always had a really hard time sharing it. And over the last few years, I'm practicing, and I'm not perfect, but I see it more and more in our male leaders that they're aware of the need to express their vulnerability with their organizations, and that gives me a great boost of confidence that we are making progress. So thank you, Ray, and thank you, Jennifer, for your comments. Absolutely terrific, and can't wait to see Fair Play. And now I'm going to turn it over to our panel, and I'm going to pass it to Davina Vargas. Hi, Davina. And she is the Senior Manager of DEI and Culture at Ingenio. And she's going to moderate a discussion on masculinity and the journey to be better allies. Davina, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, that was definitely value added. I would like to say that, and a lot of fantastic information. I know for myself, I cannot wait to see that documentary. So we're super excited to have everyone joining us today. This is definitely an extremely important topic. And I was fortunate enough to be able to connect with Ray ahead of time and dive into his book, Showing Up, which you'll hear us kind of weaving that in, because specifically chapter 2 talks a lot about often excluded voices of masculinity. And we're going to be kind of moving through that it's going to help us kind of journey through this discussion today. But first, I want to make sure that I call out and recognize our panel today. And it is specifically what we are calling an all-male panel, or a manel, all identifying as a male. So just know that was on purpose, and that was by design. We have Clarence Flowers from Genentech Oceanside, in charge of DE&I over there and employee engagement. Jason Crua is Senior Director of Network and Site Operations at Ingenio, same company I am at. And then we have Brian Sapp, who is from Strategies 360 and is the Senior Director based out of Sacramento. And what we'll be doing with these 3 panelists today are going through a series of questions and really helping us to understand what did their journey look like as they journeyed into wanting to become allies, and how did that look? So we're going to go through a few questions there. Before we do that, though, we're going to slide back in to Ray's slide. Where we talked about the 5 stages. Ray, are we sliding into that before we go into some questions?
Actually, we don't need that anymore. Hopefully
Awesome.
Everyone was paying attention earlier and it's already etched in their minds.
Beautiful. That works. That works. I'm a fan of it. You might hear me kind of reference it again. But let's dive right into these questions because I know we're limited on time. I want to start this off by really asking each of our panelists today this question. How did your journey begin? And not just your journey into what you're doing with your career, but how did your journey begin into allyship? What did that look like for you? Kind of some peaks and valleys, or was it easy? Who wants to kick it off? Oh, Clarence said yes, let's do it. Clarence, what was your journey like into allyship?
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. So for me, my career journey began, it truly began in my childhood. So growing up in a family that migrated from the South to the North, we face many challenges, right? Including racism, poverty, education, disparities, and more. So we were not afforded the privileges that many others had. In fact, my family believed in fundamental Southern Christian values that, and at the core, was given back to others. But my more revolutionary journey began in earnest a few years ago when the external environment toxicity reached a breaking point. People from the LGBTQ community, Blacks, AAPIs, immigrants, refugees, and others were all under attack. And in fact, the pandemic only highlighted systemic inequities throughout our country. And at the same time, I was working on my master's degree in organizational leadership, learning about change-making efforts. Within our company, we have begun work on psychological safety while simultaneously addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we focused on building emotional intelligence and addressing mental health and well-being. And so this really helped build my confidence in knowing that it was safe for me to bring my whole self to work. And most importantly, it helped me as a leader really to discover ways to help others that worked under me and throughout our organization.
I love that. I'm hearing that it was really in response to outside things and things that were happening that helped you with this journey. And I want to pass that same question on to Brian. How did you start your journey into allyship? And I know we've got some great juicy content I want to keep in mind for all my panelists today. We have just a few minutes per question, and I'd love to hear from all of you. Brian, go ahead. I'm going to toss it to you for a minute or two. Tell us about your allyship journey.
Sounds good. I actually love the word manalist. It's actually the first time I've ever heard that. So well done on that. Yeah, I've had a unique experience. Similar to Clarence, I grew up in the church, and I also I call myself a late bloomer, where I didn't really know what I wanted to do through my 20s, and then kind of pivoted a couple of times, but landed into the government and politics space. But I would say the idea of emotional intelligence has been something that's been really important to me. I remember a couple political cycles ago that a few of my friends, they kind of became apparent on some of their views and values, and that wasn't something that I was in alignment with. And I remember one time at a bar speaking, and I said, I don't think we should be saying that, And then that was just really odd for me to actually speak up and say, hey, I don't think we should be saying this, and there's coming off of some events that were pretty raw in our communities. And so that was kind of like a turning point for me. And I look back, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And in that, I've grown tremendously. And I think the growth for allyship has just only been sparked from there.
I love that. What I'm hearing is courage, right? It takes a lot of that to be an ally, and that, and I'm not going to reference the book again, but I could, but you'll see that it takes that to be a good ally. Jason, how about you? What started your journey into allyship?
Well, for me, early on in my career when I was younger, of course, there was, being a white male, there was less diversity in the workplace I was in. I didn't need to or didn't spend any time thinking about privilege or the lack of effort that I needed to put forth. That there was this system that sort of catered to me, even if invisibly, and you're able to just sort of go on and not think about it. I considered just my traditional roles, or what I believed would be expected of me: be a good father, a provider, a husband. And it was sort of just in that vein for a long time. And then in the last decade or so, as some people have mentioned, there were some external events that started happening. Discussions started changing about there's some issues out there you need to think about and consider. And I had those initial reactions. So when we looked at Ray's states and things of that nature, it was definitely as you would have expected. There was sort of this immediate, I felt a bit threatened. I was frustrated, even angry. And at the time didn't understand it. I was simply experiencing what many people experience every hour of every day of their waking entire life. And hey, here you go. Here's a little bit of adversity to consider. And naturally your reaction is not good initially. You see the Me Too movement, BLM, politics. I had a friend I had spoken to at one point where I started to really realize, hey, I need to start acknowledging the systems that are in place that are making this easy for me, where I don't need to consider others very much, quite honestly. That. And so absolutely. I had to take this movement from acknowledgement. And as I spoke to friends, I took on a few friends that weren't white males that I had serious conversations with. They helped me a great deal. That was a huge benefit for me. Acknowledging privilege, take a deep breath. First off, you have that visceral reaction, breathe, okay?
I love that.
We can move from taking that deep breath, listening, saying you're accountable. Believe me, it actually lifts a weight off your shoulders. And now I want to move into this phase of full accountability, taking action and helping others in that journey, bringing them with me.
I love that. And that's a good segue into our next question. And that is, Brian, I'll start with you. How do you define healthy masculinity? How do you define that? What does that mean?
I would say a big thing is emotional intelligence. And I would also say self-awareness. And the one thing that I would also add, I think the difference in the linchpin that I've kind of grown over the last few years has just been self-actualization. And that's the self-actualization is the difference between like emotional intelligence and self-awareness. It's beginning to actually take action to what those impacts are and the reflections that you've learned. And so beginning to like take action to convictions and sensitivities and just being open-minded and maintaining that open space. I come from a Black family, and then we had recently had that example of Will Smith and Chris Rock, and and I was really I'm a Black man, and I asked my little sister, I said, hey, and she's a Black woman, and I said, I need some help here. I'm seeing like this example of abuse and physical altercations on stage at the Oscars. Nonetheless, I'm also seeing someone that didn't do anything and didn't really say anything and was also not knowing how to react. This is a very public situation. And I said, teach me here, help me understand what's going on in and how women process, specifically Black women process hair. And so, and in that, I had this opportunity where my little sister really was sharing with me. And she's like, thank you so much for being open and asking questions. And I said, and that's how I phrased it. I said, I am asking questions. And I said, I just need to be aware of what's going on. And I think that is really some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we think about and move forward and really preach this in our communities.
I love that. And I'm going to pose that to Clarence as well. What is your definition of healthy masculinity? Keep in mind, we're running kind of low on time, and I want to make sure that we have time at the end for Q&A if possible. So give me about 1 minute on what you feel healthy masculinity is.
Okay, thank you, Davina. Just a quick note. I think it's just important for us, at least for me when I heard the question, is that we pause and think about some of the words that we hear in today's society, at least some of the words that I've been exposed to, like head of household, breadwinner, suck it up, quit whining, right? Crying is for girls, right? So comments like those really influence how we think of ourselves as men, and they socialize us and really cut us off, you know, from the aspects of who we truly are, right? You know, and then that leaves us with these just heavy burdens that we're faced with. So when we talk about healthy masculinity, you know, it means it means to really put aside of how we're socialized in an unhealthy way, so that we can bring the totality or fullness of who we are to our work that we do in today's society.
I love that. And Jason, I'm not going to ask you that exact same question, but I have another one that I'm going to have you kick off. And we're going to start this next one because you kind of alluded to it before. And I think it's going to be a really important one for everyone. What obstacles have you encountered during your allyship journey, and how did you overcome them? Or better yet, even, are you still working on them? Are you still working on some of these things? So what obstacles have you encountered and overcome? And what is it that you're still working on?
I'm working on all of it. They're really, it's kind of, for me, it's sort of that statement about it's not a sprint, right? This isn't something that we plan, execute, and in 90 days we say we're done with this. That's not how this works. This is a re-examination and a rewiring of oneself, as the others have described and what you're talking about. So some of the challenges I have, they're ongoing. I just feel like I'm getting better, measuredly better at addressing them. But I think they'll be around, right? Accountability, even in myself and others, it's still a difficult space to talk to someone and, you know, calling them in versus calling them out, inviting them into the journey. Maybe somebody says something that you could talk to them about, that, still navigating the space of when it's appropriate to do so, and what their reaction, because their reaction is typically going to be a difficult one because their journey might be starting. So colloquialisms, wording, that's a rewiring effort too. There are just a lot of words and phrases that we have that have just become, without consciousness, they're out there. Everybody's talking about self-awareness, emotional maturity. These are the things that will build fighting against that, right? Eliminating old behaviors, using old words that seem so harmless to someone like myself, but you learn and understand, let's move on from that. We're on a long journey together here. And so, and you know, and lastly, awareness, right? How my impact is how I speak, and my presence to others, and how that's being, how that means something. So
that one I think is really important. I'm glad you threw that in there to double down on that one. And I think it also touched to what Clarence said as well, for us to really be aware that we have this construct where this has been allowed, right? Head household, breadwinner, needs this, must make this much because of this. And so I really think that so much can be talked about around this. But Clarence, I want to pass that same question on to you before we get to our very last one. So take about a minute on this, because I think the last one is going to be really important to get to. But this will be the kind of the Black male perspective as well. What obstacles have you encountered? They might be very different than Jason's. And how have you overcome them or are still working on them?
Yeah, so as a Black man, I mean, I have my own challenges because of my race, right? You couldn't be good to succeed. I mean, you had to be great, right? So you are constantly wearing a facade, you know, and not letting your culture or my culture seep too much into out of fear of being judged, right? And so I think, you know, Black men in particular are portrayed as dangerous. You know, we are portrayed as, and so people are afraid of us, right? And so the media, deadbeat dads, you name it, right? So there's this social stigma that's attached to us. And so, and then when you hear today, in today's society, cancel culture, critical race theory, and that constant message And men, in particular, white men, are under attack from the left. It makes it difficult for us to learn about allyship, right? Out of fear of that external pressure. So for me to overcome that is we're all on this journey together, and we may not be at the same pace or at the same, but we're together. Let's figure out ways, learn from each other, listen, and take that first step, right? That action behind allyship.
I love that. And segue into the next one right after on the heels of that is this last question. And Brian, I'm going to have you kick it off because it really feeds into what Clarence just said. And really it's as a result of your learnings, what are through your personal kind of journey as aspiring ally, what guidance do you have for men? And this is something as a DE&I practitioner comes up all the time. And I myself even said, Ray, what do you tell to men? People ask, how do we start? I've heard your journey, but what do I do? Brian, what advice do you have for other males out there who want to be on that allyship journey? What do you have?
I would, just say, ask questions, ask questions with an open heart and an open mind and really an open soul. And then ask the challenging questions, to people that may not be part of your friends group or the people that look like you or the people that you see on a regular basis. Ask those questions. I know that I've had to learn, I don't know what it's like to be a transgender person. That's not something that I identify with. That's not something that I grew up in an environment that didn't really have that. And so I had to ask a lot of questions, and really have some open understandings to learn and to identify that perspective. And I think that I can't say that I've achieved it, and I can't say that I'm 100%, but I can say I'm a lot closer today than I was yesterday and the day before. And so asking those questions and being willing to be challenged will help you move a lot faster.
Awesome. And there is really a distinction between guidance to, let's say, white men, and maybe a distinction between guidance to all men. Clarence, do you have any guidance that you want to offer to either side, to either one?
Yes, I would just say that, allyship is really a moment by moment doing, is what I heard before, right? It's not a noun, it's a verb, right? And as I mentioned earlier, taking those first steps. And, I've been married, celebrating this year, 35 years. And one of the things I've learned is listening, right? Showing compassion, showing empathy, right? And it's so hard for us males to do. But if you start somewhere, listen to other groups that are different from your group, right? And just listen, just show up, right? And I think those are the best first steps that would help you succeed in this, in allyship.
I love that. And as we kind of round it out, we have a minute left here. Jason, I would love to hear your perspective. What advice do you have?
So for white males, for example, no need to credential here. So understand that this isn't about racism or an indictment on your character, right? There's intersectionality here. This is not an attack on whether you treat people a certain way when you encounter them on the street. That's not what this is about, right? So what you can do is simply do what some of the others said about learning. So for example, streaming services, hey, they have entire sections now on DEI, and you can take some time to watch materials there, watch female directed movies, see characters and their arcs not written through a male gaze and the history of male gazes, and talk to other women in your life, ask questions that you want to work on this journey. You'll be surprised at how much support you get if you ask for help there. If you have children, you can talk to them about it too as you learn. Reading books, we do a book club, right? Cast by Isabel Wilkerson was a great book that we read. It sort of discusses the roots of this unconscious, self-correcting hierarchical structure that the world has to deal with, and this is sort of part of that, right? So there's a lot of resources that you can reach out to, and if you need to do it alone first. Yes, educate yourself with materials, even if that's not your first react, and measure your reaction as a progress point too.
That's perfect.
Your initial reaction might be that fear and threatening. It will grow into this curiosity and understanding, empathy, listening, emotional maturity. Those things will start to grow and you'll feed off of them.
I love that. Thank you so much. And a huge thank you to our panelists. I am actually going to bring Ray back up right now so that we can do a Q&A, and not just Q&A for you all, my panelists, but I really think we're opening it up so people can ask questions for everything. Ray, I'm going to hand it back over to you. Thank you for allowing us the space. Of course, Bay Area Council, which I am a member of, and I am a grateful member of because of moments like this. Ray, go ahead, take it back over.
Thanks, Davina. I must say that it was nice to have somebody else do this. So one of the things I'm learning as a white ally in training is I don't have to do it all the time. And so many other people are so many capable, and I actually get to watch amazing things happen and learn. So thank you. So there's a question that came from the audience that pretty much validated one of the reasons why I wrote this chapter, Too Often Excluded Voices of Masculinity. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to pose the question. So the person asked, can you please express the experience of Black men who may be minimized in multiple ERGs, whether by fear of being considered hyper-masculine, that was the threatening piece that Clarence talked about before, or familiar with having to suppress their feelings as a byproduct to having be seen as not emotional? So I think, Clarence, I want to ask you this question. There's this conundrum of what happens if I, as a Black man, show my emotions? What does that invite? As opposed, it feels like this either or yucky thing. So if you can speak to that in your own eloquent, heart-centered way, I'd love to hear it.
You know, Ray, I have to be honest with you, working in industry for so long, it's been the constant challenge, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's that facade that I talked about earlier, right? And it is, you're constantly wondering, like, if I show too much emotion, it makes me think about, on the flip side of how we hear about the angry Black woman, right? And, you know, as I mentioned before, there's this attached stereotype that Black men can come across as dangerous. So for me, it's always been this constant balance. And I have to be honest with you, over the last couple of years, when I've heard more terms, for example, like psychological safety, and understanding within our organization that it's safe to speak up, I've been willing to put myself out there more. Prior to that, what I would do is ask more questions, but I've always had to channel my inner emotions, which is that facade that I talked about earlier.
Thank you for that, Clarence. So another question that I'll answer is, how do we encourage conversations like this to continue in the workplaces in open and safe ways? What that question speaks to is psychological safety, but it also is a call out for leadership. So an answer would be, ask particular males who have power, resistance, and privilege to be human, to go first, to put themselves on the learning path, and to set up what I would call we call it rules of the road, but what can make it possible for people to show up and be who they are so that they can share how they're feeling. You know, this whole notion of emotional literacy is huge. We don't want to be so worried about how we're going to make others feel when we're in our truth. And at the same time, we want to be sensitive to impact to others. So I have a question for you, Davina. Did you see the piece around in the Q&A, or do you want me to read it to you?
Is it which one? The one at the very bottom? What can individuals do?
No, this is about studies highlight how many white women have propped up white male patriarchy and the structures that exist. Please talk about the role of white women. Since I'm not a woman, I'm like, I better not answer this, but maybe you have some guidance, because it speaks to women of color and how sometimes Black men can feel hijacked with DEI. If you could take that, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. And I will do my best to answer this question, not being a white woman. And it seemed like that was the question about being propped up. But I would say this, at least among DE&I practitioners in circles that I see and things that I have seen throughout the corporate world, I see this. It is a kind of that structure where your whiteness can still come into play. Even though you are a woman, right? You're a woman. And so you are hitting some glass ceilings and different things like that. You still are able to use your whiteness to gain entry into different clubs. And so in that hierarchy, which is an invisible one that we wish didn't exist, but we know does, you might have the white male, then you might have the white female, then you might have the black male, then you might have the black female. It goes like that. Yeah. And often studies will show us that it can go like that. So what do we do, I think, to counteract that? And I think that it is the courage that I speak to a lot of times. And I, for one, am not afraid to say to an executive, people that I always say, do not be afraid to talk to levels above and say to them, hey, I need you to be an ally and let me tell you what I need for that to really come to life. I need your help in doing these things. We have this group that is starting. Can you come and speak to this group? Can you talk about your journey and then let us talk about ours? So I would say if there are structures where it's being propped up, courage is going to come into play because it will start somewhere. If you have people that don't recognize what it is that they're doing, it is then on us to say, let me help you to see how it is that you make us feel. If they don't make changes from there, we make decisions from there. But if you don't know, you can't change it. And we can't assume that they do know because they didn't walk our journey.
So thank you for that. And what you just modeled is what I often invite people in your position. I've received a number of calls from women of color in DEI departments. One of the first things I say is, who's that white cisgendered guy that has power, position, privilege? And if you invite him, if you ask for help, any reasonable guy is going to say, okay, what do I need to do? So this is not about shame or vilifying. It's about coming from the heart, human to human. That's the only way that this stuff's going to change. And Clarence, you said earlier, you know, there's the left and the right, and how there's huge divide. There's one answer. It's the heart. So there's another question here that comes from Jim Katona, and he asks, as a cisgendered white male, I'm curious, what role does exploring the feminine within myself play in my growth? Jim, I don't even know you. I love you for asking that question. And so here's my answer. I jokingly say that my 22 years of men's work has been a journey to my inner feminine on my way to being a whole human. So putting that aside for a second, we all have masculine and feminine attributes to us with respect to leadership. And even those labels, what it means to be feminine or what it means to be masculine, hopefully someday we'll get beyond that. But if you think about this, or any other man who's thinking this, and the same is true for women, if us guys start going inside and seek to learn about those other aspects that we've disowned, we've suppressed because society hasn't allowed us, we're going to become the true human beings that we're capable of. And to Jen, what was saying, everyone wins. We win because it feels better. The people in our life feels better. We're modeling it for kids, and it just goes on and on and on. Now, you'll notice when I said this is the same true for women. How many women know what it's like to masculinize in order to perform and survive inside a company, to go along with the boys club? Not a long-term solution. So I have this personal vision that women reclaim their feminine, the nurturing, all those amazing qualities that women have. And again, I'm listening to myself, binary language. So I just want to call that out for those of you that don't identify like I do or like Davina does. So that would be my answer. If there's a panelist, whether it's Jason, Clarence, or Brian, that wants to comment on any of these questions, I'd love to hear from you. And then we're going to wrap. And if I had the ability to play Jeopardy music, I'd be playing it right now.
Perfect time for it. Call them out, call the question, have them answer. They'll do it.
Yeah. You got anything, Brian, for us? I'm going to call you forward here. Anything to say?
I'm I am taking a look at one of these questions, and I'm seeing the one kids are progressing to real, kids shows are progressing to real lift up female voices now. Ray's Dion had some very interesting and important Black and female empowerment themes. And well, that's a comment. Let's see here. What can individuals do who identify as female help males in their journey to allyship? What can we do? Oh, that's a great question. I think that creating spaces in the workplace and in personal lives specifically of where trust and partnership is created. I think that is something that, you know, females can do. And also one of the things, like for me, is I do look to, I'm in an environment right now where I've got female bosses. And I think that it's important for me and them to create this, you know, clear roles, clear roles of just like hierarchy, because that's just like the way that I organize. But on the other side, like I want them to talk to me and I want them to ask me questions. And so I think, but I've established a rapport and a spirit of kind of tradeship that, you know, we have that partnership to speak. And so I think that, you know, females can ask questions. I don't think that females should be afraid to ask questions. I think that females also should, that women should be, I mean, I think that we're in a day and age where people should be speaking to this. And so I think that that's the biggest thing, is using your voice and, you know, raising it and amplifying it in the correct way.
Thank you for that, Brian. I'm paying attention to time and I'd love to answer more of these questions, but if anybody wants to get some questions answered, send an email to me, ray@bettermanconference.com, and I'll do the best I can. So it's almost that time. So I think there's a slide for the representation project that I want to acknowledge. And while that's happening, I want to take a moment to thank the Bay Area Council for partnering with me on this. Jennifer Siebel Newsom, for being who you are and bringing your contribution. Thank you so much. Davina, I loved watching you in action, and all the panelists. And so if we can get that slide up, and I also want to thank everybody for attending and participating in the chat. So I believe, okay, we'll do mine first. So for those of you who want to continue your journey, in the fall, we're going to be doing a live Better Man conference in San Francisco, I believe at the Julia Morgan Ballroom. Sign up for our newsletter. We send blogs out occasionally. It's a great way to join our community, and we'll fill you in on what's happening with respect to the conference. And for keynotes, coaching, etc., rayarata.com. And if you want to get the book, one of the cool things about going up to showingupbook.com is when you get the book, you can register for a free virtual ticket, because we'll be streaming the conference that we're going to be doing live in New York, live in San Francisco, same day, same time, but we'll be streaming back and forth and streaming outward. So with that said, if we can go to the slide for the representation project, I believe we have a slide for them, unless I'm misreading the run of show. I want to make sure I get this back to Jim. So it doesn't look like it. So Jim, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Well, look, thanks, Ray, very much. Love being a participant in your journey, and look forward to future work on this. I want to point out to everyone that this is just another stop along the highway, and we will be doing more of this work. And look forward to having your participation there's this in helping define where we can provide the most value as the Bay Area Council. I want to thank Jennifer, terrific as always. Davina, you did a great job leading the panel. Jason, Brian, Clarence, love listening to you fellows. Learned a lot, and then great questions and comments from the panelists in the chat and then in the Q&A. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Leslie Alfaro, for putting this together, on the Bay Area Council team behind the scenes, people you can't see, but do a great job. Onward and upward, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks very, very much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, and those who are part of the team here, stick around